It was precisely 5 minutes past midnight when a knock, crisp and deliberate, echoed through my apartment on Bleecker Street. The rain had just begun tapping at the window panes like a nervous pianist, and I, Jonathan Marlowe, private investigator, had just poured my third drink. I don't get visitors at midnight unless they've got something heavy on their conscience or blood on their hands. I opened the door. She was tall, dressed in black lace and soaked through from the storm. Her eyes, gray and unreadable, met mine with calm urgency. "Mr. Marlowe?" she asked. "That's what the name on the frosted glass says. Come in before the ghosts get jealous." She stepped in, leaving a trail of rain behind her. I offered her a seat and a towel. She didn't take either. "My name is Evelyn Drake," she said. "I need your help." I nodded toward the clock on my wall. Unusual hour for a polite request. "My husband is dead," she said, "but he didn't die by accident." I set my drink down. "He fell from our library balcony last night. Police say it was suicide, but Henry didn't jump. He was pushed." Her voice was sharp, measured, like someone who'd been rehearsing that sentence all day. "Why come to me?" She hesitated. "Because I found a note in his pocket, a torn piece of paper with just one line. The clock strikes 13. I lit a cigarette. "And does your house have a clock that knows how to lie?" She didn't blink. "Yes. A grandfather clock. It chimes 13 times every night at 2:00 a.m., but only when someone is in the library." I leaned back in my chair. This was the kind of case I liked. One foot in reality, the other in madness. "You've got yourself a detective, Mrs. Drake," I said. "But I don't chase ghosts. I chase men who pretend to be ghosts." Outside, the thunder cracked. Somewhere, a clock was waiting to strike 13. By noon the next day, I found myself standing on the steps of the Drake estate. A Victorian mansion dressed in ivy and damp fog, it stood just outside the city like a rich man's ghost. Elegant, silent, and hiding too many secrets. Evelyn Drake greeted me in morning black, her composure as sharp as the iron fence that lined the property. She led me inside without a word. The house smelled of dust, old books, and something faintly metallic. Blood, maybe, or just the memory of it. "The library is this way," she said. We entered a room that looked more like a museum than a study. Bookshelves from floor to ceiling, a hunting rifle above the fireplace, and dead men staring down at me from oil paintings. Then I saw it. The grandfather clock. It stood tall in the corner, like a witness that didn't care if it lied. Polished walnut, gold pendulum, Roman numerals. Beautiful, precise. But it radiated something off. "You say it strikes 13?" I asked. "Only at 2 a.m. only if someone is here," she said. "How long has it done that?" 3 nights before Henry died. He thought it was a fault in the mechanism, but he didn't call a repairman. "And now?" She looked away. "It struck 13 again last night." I knelt to inspect the base. No sign of tampering, no hidden compartments. "Where was your husband found?" She led me to the balcony just above the library, an open space with wrought iron railing and a dizzying view of the marble floor below. "He was lying there," she said, pointing to a faded outline on the tile. "Anyone else home that night?" She shook her head. "Just the maid, who says she was asleep. I think he was lured up here." I studied her face. No tears, just precision, like the clock. "Do you think someone wanted him dead?" I asked. She took a long pause. "I think the clock knows," she whispered, "and I think someone is using it to speak." I looked around. The library, the balcony, the clock. And the first gear in the machine began to turn. After Evelyn left me to the silence of the library, I did what any detective worth his trench coat would do. I lit a cigarette, pulled out my notebook, and started asking questions that couldn't answer themselves. The first, who benefits from Henry Drake's death? The second, who would know the clock chimes 13? The third, why would a man about to die leave a cryptic note instead of a name? I wandered the estate until I found the maid, a small, sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Caro. She didn't trust me, and I respected her for that. I heard nothing, she insisted, arms crossed in the hallway. Mr. Drake had his study nights. Mrs. Drake stayed in her room. I keep out of their way. Did he have enemies? She looked over her shoulder, lowered her voice. He had secrets, that's worse. I filed that away. Back in town, I dug into the Drake records. Took all of 20 minutes to find the red flags. Henry Drake had been on the board of a construction firm that collapsed last fall. Missing funds, lawsuits, quiet settlements. 2 former partners had gone missing, one presumed dead, the other vacationing in Buenos Aires. And then, tucked in a corner of an old financial column, I found a name. Luther Bellman, a clockmaker, former engineer for Drake's firm. Sued for defamation. Case dismissed. Interesting. I visited Bellman's shop on Dock Street. It smelled like grease, tobacco, and revenge. You knew Henry Drake? I asked. He looked up from a disassembled cuckoo clock, his face half-shadowed by magnifying lenses. I knew the man who ruined me, is that what you mean? I nodded. Did you ever work on the grandfather clock at the Drake estate? He smiled without warmth. I built it. I didn't flinch. You're saying that clock was custom-made. Every tooth of the gear, every chime of the bell, and yes, 13 chimes is possible, if someone knows how to wind it that way. I leaned forward. Then who's winding it now? His smile faded. That, Mr. Marlowe, is the question I've been asking myself since the night Henry Drake died. Luther Bellman's eyes had the glaze of a man who'd lost too much to forget. He stole my patents, he said flatly, used my designs to line his pockets, then buried me in court before I could bury him in facts. And the clock? Originally built to strike 13 as a novelty, Bellman said, tapping his fingers on the desk. Hidden lever in the base. Only someone who knows the mechanism, or watched me build it, could activate it. Could Drake have done it himself? He laughed. Henry Drake couldn't tell a pendulum from a doorknob. And Evelyn? Bellman paused. The silence grew heavy. She visited my shop once, he said finally, before she married him, asked about time, about control, about how a man could be reminded of what he did, over and over again. I left the shop with more questions than answers. If Evelyn knew about the 13th chime, then either she was terrified of it, or she wanted it heard. That night, I returned to the Drake estate. I let myself into the library with the spare key Evelyn had given me. Midnight ticked closer. The clock stood still, as always, silent, imposing. I sat in the chair below the balcony, notebook open, pistol tucked under my coat. At 1:45, the house was dead quiet. At 2 o'clock, the clock began to move. Bong, bong, bong. I counted, hand tightening on the grip of my pistol. 9, 10, 11, 12. A long pause. Then 13. And behind the bookshelf, a creak. I stood slowly, drew my gun, and stepped toward the sound. One of the lower shelves had shifted. I pulled at it. It swung open, a hidden door. Inside was a narrow passage, lit by a single candle. And standing there, caught in the glow, was Evelyn Drake, but her eyes were not wide with fear. They were calm, calculated, waiting. Evelyn didn't flinch when she saw the pistol in my hand. Instead, she stepped out of the hidden passage like a woman returning from a stroll, not a woman caught in the belly of a secret. "You found it faster than I expected," she said calmly. "Funny thing about clocks," I replied. "If you listen long enough, they always tell the truth." She smiled faintly. "Is that why you came? For the truth?" "I came because your husband was found dead under a library balcony, and his pocket held a riddle instead of a goodbye. Now, I find you wandering hidden corridors at 2 in the morning." Her expression didn't change. "What do you think happened, Mr. Marlowe?" "I think someone used the 13th chime to scare him, lure him, maybe blackmail him, maybe punish him." "And you think that someone is me?" I stepped closer. "You had motive, you had access, and you had time, no pun intended." Evelyn turned away, walking slowly along the edge of the shelf. "Henry wasn't a good man. He wasn't a kind man. But he was clever. Clever enough to ruin people. Like Luther Bellman, like others. And you?" She paused. "He didn't ruin me, but he made me forget who I was before him. That's another kind of death." I lowered the pistol slightly. "Did you kill him?" "No." I studied her carefully. Her voice was steady, but there was grief buried beneath it. Not sadness for Henry, but for the part of herself she'd buried to survive him. "I didn't kill him," she repeated. "But I opened the door for whoever did." "What do you mean?" She stepped aside, revealing the lever built into the clock's base. "I reactivated the 13th chime. I wanted him to remember, to lose sleep, to panic, and I watched, every night, from behind this wall. And then, one night, I came down, and he was gone." Her eyes met mine. "You're the detective, Mr. Marlowe. You tell me if that makes me innocent." I didn't answer. Because I wasn't sure I could. I stood in the hidden corridor long after Evelyn had gone. The lever was still exposed beneath the grandfather clock. Small, simple, deadly in its implications. Activate it, and the mechanism clicked forward once more, allowing the pendulum to swing an extra time. 13 chimes. 13 chances to make a man lose his mind. Evelyn hadn't pulled the trigger, but she'd set the trap. I returned to my office by sunrise, my coat heavy with rain and suspicion. On my desk was a message slid under the door sometime during the night. Scrawled in thick pencil, "You're looking in the wrong direction. Some things don't tick, they hiss. No signature." But I recognized the paper. It was the same type Bellman used in his shop. Rough, faded, and smelling faintly of oil. I lit a cigarette and made 2 calls. One to the coroner who examined Henry Drake, and one to a friend in the city's animal control department. Then I waited. By noon, both calls came back. The coroner admitted something odd. There was a puncture near the ankle, tiny, almost missed it. I chalked it up to glass from the fall. And the toxicology? Standard panel, no poison detected. But if you're thinking venom, well, we didn't test for that. I was. The second call was more alarming. "We picked up a black market delivery 2 weeks ago," the animal officer said. "Snakes. One of them went missing before we arrived. Exotic, Southeast Asian. Aggressive, neurotoxic venom. Could kill a man in minutes." I hung up and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Someone didn't just scare Henry. Someone used Evelyn's ghost stories to camouflage a murder. And now I was sure. The clock hadn't killed Henry Drake. Something much quieter had. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but, like any good puzzle, the center was still missing. Someone had used the legend of the clock to plant fear, but someone else had used the chaos to deliver death. And snakes don't climb balconies on their own. I paid another visit to Luther Bellman, the clockmaker. He was cleaning gears when I arrived, but his hand stilled the moment he saw me. "You got my note," he said. "Figured you would." "You told me you built the 13th chime," I said. "But you left out the part where you built a snake hatch behind the clock." His eyes flickered. I dropped a folder on his workbench. Custom compartment behind the clock frame, just big enough to hold a coiled serpent. Door opens when the 13th chime hits, triggered by pressure. The same pressure Henry Drake would have applied when leaning against the wall in panic. Bellman didn't speak. "You knew he'd panic," I said. "You knew he'd lean back, trying to get away from the sound. And when he did, the trap opened," Bellman said softly. "So the snake didn't climb," I finished. "It was placed, tucked into the clock like a loaded gun." He lit a cigarette, hand steady. "I didn't place it, I just designed the mechanism. I told myself that was different." "But you knew someone would." He looked me in the eyes for the first time. "He ruined lives. He ruined mine. He built his world on bones and lies, and he died the way he lived, never seeing the hand that would strike." I leaned in. "Who put the snake in the clock, Bellman?" He exhaled smoke slowly. "Does it matter? It does to me." He tapped ash into the tray. "It wasn't Evelyn." I nodded. I already knew. It was someone else who knew the house, who moved freely between rooms, and who'd be invisible to suspicion. Someone like the maid, Mrs. Caro. Mrs. Caro greeted me at the Drake estate door with the same look she'd worn the first time we met. Tight-lipped, unimpressed, and tired of men asking questions. "Back again," she said. "Haven't you found your ghost yet?" "I'm not looking for ghosts anymore," I replied. "I'm looking for snakes." She froze. "Not much, but enough." I stepped inside without waiting for her invitation. Funny thing about old houses, so many hiding places, behind the clock, under the floorboards, even under a servant's bed. Her eyes narrowed. "You accusing me of something, detective?" I stopped in the center of the library, the grandfather clock looming behind me like a wooden judge. "I'm accusing you of knowing too much, Mrs. Caro, of being in the house the night Henry died, of being near the clock at the precise time it chimed 13. You said it yourself. He fell from the balcony." "I did, but he was trying to escape from something slithering up his leg." She said nothing. "I spoke to the animal unit," I went on. "They traced the missing snake to a handler who used to rent out exotic pets. Paid in cash. Left no name, but he remembered the accent." Her hands clenched. "Scottish, like you." Still, she didn't speak, so I pressed the final truth. "I also know Henry Drake fired your sister from his firm, left her penniless. She died 6 months later. You never forgot, never forgave." Her voice came at last, quiet and sharp. "And Evelyn? What about her? You think she's clean in all this?" "No, but I think she wanted justice." Mrs. Caro stared at the clock. "She wanted revenge." I walked slowly toward the door. "So did you. You just got there first." Before I left, I turned one last time. He would have gotten away with it all until the 13th chime. Mrs. Caro's voice followed me out, cold as stone. Then maybe that clock finally did something right. I didn't turn Mrs. Caro in, not yet. Maybe it was the look in her eyes. Maybe it was the silence that followed every word she didn't say. Or maybe I just wasn't ready to hand her over. Not until I was sure. Back at my office, the rain had started again, tapping Morse code against the glass. I poured a drink and sat in the dark, letting the facts arrange themselves like cards on a table. Evelyn set the trap in motion. Bellman built the machine that delivered the fear. Caro placed the serpent. And Henry Drake. He listened, panicked, and died in the only house that ever made him feel invincible. But there was one thing still bothering me. Why the note? Why would a dying man write "the clock strikes 13" instead of calling for help, unless he knew exactly what was happening but didn't know who was behind it? Unless the note wasn't meant for the police. It was meant for someone else. The next morning, I returned to the estate, only to find Evelyn already waiting in the library. She was standing in front of the clock, hand resting lightly on the polished wood. "I expected you," she said. "You always do." She didn't smile. "Is it done?" "Almost, but there's something I want to know. When you found the note in Henry's pocket, you said it had only one line." I held up a copy. "But that's not true, is it? There was something else." Her fingers tightened against the clock. I continued. "The original note had your name on it, not as a signature, but as a warning." She didn't deny it. "He thought it was you," I said. "His final suspicion was that you'd finally gotten tired of being afraid, that you'd turned his own paranoia against him." She looked at me, and this time there were no shields in her eyes, only sorrow. "I wanted him to suffer," she said, "but I didn't want him dead." I nodded slowly. "So, who do I hold responsible, Mrs. Drake?" Her answer came like a whisper. "All of us." The clock had stopped ticking. It stood silent now, unmoving, the pendulum still. The 13th chime, once a phantom, was buried again behind its gears. Evelyn sat across from me in the drawing room, the storm outside echoing what neither of us wanted to say aloud. "You could go to the police," she said quietly. "I could," I replied. "But you won't." I didn't answer, not right away. "I've seen justice served in courtrooms," I said at last, "and I've seen it served in silence. I've seen killers walk free because no one could prove their hands were dirty, and I've seen broken people punished for acts they didn't commit alone." She looked away. "So, what am I?" I stared at the fireplace. "You're a survivor. So is Caro and Bellman. And maybe that's why this case cuts deeper than most, because no one here is innocent, but none of you are truly guilty either." We sat with that for a while. Then she asked, "Will you tell them?" "I already have," I said. Her eyes snapped to mine. "Not the police, the truth. I wrote it all down. The 13th chime, the clock, the snake, all of it. Names changed, dates blurred, but the story lives." She nodded slowly. "You're not going to publish it?" "Not yet, maybe not ever." A silence hung between us. Then she stood and offered her hand. "Goodbye, Mr. Marlowe." I took it. "Goodbye, Mrs. Drake." I stepped out into the rain, coat collar up, fedora low. The city moved on like it always does, oblivious to the secrets ticking behind grand old houses and polished walnut clocks. Henry Drake was dead. The estate would be sold, the snake was gone, and the clock would never strike 13 again. But I'd still hear it in my head sometimes. Because the cases that matter most aren't solved with fingerprints and bullets. They're solved when you finally understand why someone stopped telling the time and started using it. I didn't expect to return to the Drake estate again. But a week later, I got a letter, no return address, just a wax seal and a single line on the envelope. For the man who listened when others wouldn't. Inside was a brass key and a note in Evelyn's handwriting. There's one more truth hidden inside the clock. Not for justice, not for guilt, just for closure. I trust you to do what's right with it. So I went. The house was empty now, the staff dismissed. Furniture under white sheets, only the clock remained in the library, untouched, like it had been waiting. I opened the panel behind its base using the key. Inside, beneath the gears and the hollow chime rods, I found a small leather-bound book, old, brittle, and wrapped in twine. It was Henry Drake's journal. The final entries weren't the ramblings of a madman. They were confessions, names, numbers, deals, who he betrayed, how much money changed hands. And one final line, written in shaky ink. If you're reading this, the clock has caught up with me. I sat there for a long time. I could have taken it to the authorities. I could have leaked it to the papers. I could have sold it to the highest bidder. Instead, I burned it. Not out of mercy, not out of loyalty. Because it no longer mattered. The clock had already delivered its verdict. When I returned to Baker Street, I sat in my office and poured a drink. On the wall, my own small clock ticked in perfect rhythm. I took out my case journal and wrote, "The case of the widow's clock closed." Justice was never loud, but it was exact. And, like the clock, it struck when it was ready. Then I turned off the light. Some cases echo, but this one kept time. It rained again the night I closed the file for good. Outside, the city kept moving. People chasing trains, shouting in bars, stealing kisses under gas lamps. But in my office, all was quiet, save for the steady tick of the small brass clock on my wall. I stared at the case folder a long time before sealing it. 12 parts, 13 chimes, 1 man dead, 3 others who lived with what they did or didn't do. I could have handed names to the police, could have traced venom to its source, built a timeline, pinned it down to seconds and motives. But some crimes don't belong in courtrooms. Some don't need witnesses. They need a reckoning. And I'd watched it happen. Henry Drake's ghost wasn't angry. It didn't want vengeance. It just wanted someone to finally understand why the time of death wasn't measured in minutes, but in choices. Bellman went back to building clocks. The 13th chime now just a memory in his designs. Mrs. Caro disappeared. Some said she left the country. I didn't ask where. And Evelyn, she vanished into a quiet life, one without shadows or bells that rang too long. I lit a cigarette, looked out into the night and told myself something I didn't quite believe. It was over, but I knew the truth. Somewhere, in some old house, another clock ticks too long. Another secret counts down behind a ticking lie. And when it does, when the hour strikes again, I'll be listening. Because that's what I do. I listen. And I wait for the sound that doesn't belong. The sound that says, "Time's up."